girl's trying to get me eat some dinner she cooked. I'm reading a book, girl, I'm reading a book. Don't you ever interrupt me while I'm reading a book.
Hello, welcome to Read It Again, and welcome to the mid-year book freakout tag. I feel like I'm the last one to do this. I've watched probably 15, 20 or more of you guys, other booktubers, do this tag, and I've really kept saying I want to do it. I want to do it, but I just keep putting it off. But now, finally, I'm doing it. So I am actually here at a classroom at Bethlehem Bible College. I'm in a classroom recording this video. My intention was to record this video yesterday. I had the opportunity to go to Beit Sahur, a nearby local village. And in this village, there are 3 different churches called the Shepherd's Field Church. One's a Melkite, one's a Greek Orthodox, and one's a Catholic. There's also a little chapel that is where legend has it that the Virgin Mary came and got water from that well on their way into Bethlehem. So there's some really nice historical stuff there. Boaz's field is in that area. If you're not familiar with Boaz, the story of Ruth, the 8th book of the Bible, is all about Ruth marrying Boaz. But anyways, so I wanted to film this on location at Shepherd's Field Chapel, and you're going to see some pictures of the chapel, and it's a very beautiful location. It would have been a great spot to do it, but while I was out touring, I actually bumped into another guy who is he's a French university student who's volunteering here in Jerusalem, but he was visiting Bethlehem for the day. And the two of us ended up hanging out the whole day. So I didn't take nearly as many pictures or videos as I wanted to. And I didn't shoot that because life got in the way. So anyways, you'll see these videos and you'll see some of those images while I do the mid-year book freakout tag. Anyways, the mid-year book freakout tag. The first question, what is the best book you have read so far in year 2022? Now, everybody's doing multiple books. I figure for a couple of these questions, I'm going to do 2 books. I'm going to give you 2 answers. One is a nonfiction, the other is a fiction. The reason for this, I've read 59 books so far this year. 33 of those books are nonfiction. 26 of the books are fiction. And also of the 33 that are nonfiction, I'm pretty sure 7 of those are textbooks. So if you remove the textbooks for my master's level, I'm getting a master's degree in global studies. If you remove those textbooks from there, then I've read 26 of each. So I figured this is pretty good balance. And so I'm going to give you 1 of each for a lot of these questions. So the favorite book you've read this year, the best book you've read this year, for nonfiction, the answer I'm giving is The Life We're Looking For. This is by Andy Crouch. The subtitle of the book, Reclaiming Relationship in a Technological World. And I honestly didn't think it was going to be as good as it was. It really impressed me. I feel like he's speaking my language because we need technology and we need to use technology, and it's part of our world. There's no rolling back from that. But at the same time, I don't enjoy technology. I am not a fan of just getting on Facebook and blowing a day, or I'm not a fan of doing this. I'd much rather prefer seeing people and meeting people face to face, talking face to face, and even phone calls or texts or any of that. But he looks at a very intelligent and a very wise way to use technology instead of letting the technology use you. And he has each chapter has really different comparisons, like superpower versus flow, or impact versus influence, or house versus household, or I'm not sure the word you use there, but a house versus household. But he's got these 2 different things, and he's balancing one. If you're letting the technology use you, device versus instrument is another one that you talk about. He does this, and the book is really good, and it's really well done. It's very readable, and it's a good book if you're frustrated if you feel like you're becoming a slave to your technology, or if you feel like you don't have control over your social media life, but it has control over you. This would be a good book to really kind of ground yourself and to get base with that. The second book, the fiction book that I'm doing for your favorite book of the year, is Jade City by Fonda Lee. I loved the concept of this book. And the first one, we'll talk about the second one later on. But the first one, Jade City, I absolutely love the concept. We basically have a Godfather meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon type of book. And there's an imaginary island in East Asia that has a lot of jade. And this specific type of jade gives specific people superpowers. And those superpowers turn them into the type of Asian type fighting that we see in movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or Hero, or not The Last Samurai, but some of the others, House of Flying Daggers, some of the artistic style of fighting. This book grounds that in their own type of reality, and the world is very well built, and the system is very well built, and I loved the first book. I thought that the concept was great, and I had high hopes for this series, but Jade City was probably my favorite fiction book that I read this year. So the next question, what is the best sequel you read so far in 2022? Now, I did read the sequel to Jade City, but that's not the one I'm choosing for the best sequel. The best sequel I'm doing is Caliban's War. Any of you guys watched the show The Expanse? James Corey has written those, and I read at the beginning of the year a bunch of those. I don't think I read all the way to the end, but I read a bunch of those. And Caliban's War was probably my favorite sequel of the year. It follows the same story. You have Holden, and it's a sci-fi book, but it's kind of like there's a lot of politics involved, and there's it's a really well-written book and a good book. My biggest complaint that I did have with Caliban's War, I felt like the story was better than the first book, but the book itself wasn't quite as good. I didn't enjoy it quite as much because James Corey felt like he needed to end almost every single chapter with a cliffhanger, and I was not a fan of that. I would prefer having cliffhangers for some chapters, yes. Even if you're doing a series, cliffhanger at the end, yes. But I felt like every single chapter was done by a different perspective, and you're leaving so many cliffhangers, but then going 3 or 4 more chapters before you get back to that perspective. And so I felt like it just detracted or took away from the book and all. But I love Caliban's War. The whole series is really good. It's well done, and the TV show is even better. So until Amazon ruined it. But so go ahead and get that, Caliban's War. Next question, your new release that you haven't read yet but want to. For this, I chose Evershore. It is one of the novellas for Brandon Sanderson and Janci Patterson's Cytonic series, and it's a novella, so it's a short book. It's virtually, I'm pretty sure, the only thing, or one of the only things by Brandon Sanderson that I haven't read yet. It actually came out in December last year, but I'm counting that as a new release. I just haven't gotten to it yet. I love Brandon Sanderson. He is by far the best fantasy author out there, and anyone disagrees with me, let's fight about it, because he's definitely the best fantasy author out there. Anyways, this isn't fantasy, it's sci-fi. Janci Patterson works with him with it. Good book. I should get it. I will read it soon. Next question. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Again, we're going Brandon Sanderson. He's probably one of the only authors that I really follow is in as soon as a book of his comes out, I get it, I read it. There's other authors I love, I really enjoy, but he's probably the only one that when a new book comes out, my life has disappeared for a day or two while I read it. And The Lost Metal is the fourth from the Mistborn Saga Series 2. There's the first 3, the Mistborn Saga, the first 3 books, and then there's the Wax and Wayne books, they're called. And those are like the second era in the Mistborn Saga. And this is the 4th, and I believe the final book for that second era. So if you've not read it, there's no way to describe that and make it sound good. You've just got to read all of the Mistborn books. But the second era, Wax and Wayne, Wayne is so great. I love that guy. But anyways, next question, number 5, biggest disappointment of the year. And again, for this, I have 2 books. For my nonfiction book, I have Persians. This was written by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. And it's supposed to be a history of the Persian Empire. And I've read a lot on the Roman Empire, but I really haven't found any really good books or that many really good books on the Persian Empire. So if you know some nonfiction history that deals with primarily the Persian Empire, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Everybody like and subscribe. You know how that works. But anyways, Persians, he loved this Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones. It really felt more like an apologia or a hagiography than it did a book of history. He warped and twisted the facts. He had a very selective use of his sources. He'd use Herodotus when he agreed with Herodotus, and then he would completely trash Herodotus when he didn't agree with him. He used some very questionable sources, but also he didn't source anything. He didn't put, there's no footnotes, there's no bibliography, so we don't know where his research was coming from and how valid it is. And there are very certain points in the book where I know for a fact what he's saying is incorrect and untrue, and it's wrong. It's just downright wrong because of other things that I've read that are more scholarly and a better work. So this book, I had very high hopes for it, and it disappointed me. Don't read it. Don't bother. The second book that was a big disappointment for me, the biggest disappointment for fiction, was Jade War by Fonda Lee. I don't know what happened. The first book was so good, but I got to the second book and I was just so bored with it. I felt like the idea was done. And it should have really only been a standalone novel. I never even bothered reading the third one because the second one disappointed me so much. So Jade War was a big disappointment for me. I know some of you love it. That's probably a hot take. If you disagree, go ahead and leave in the comments why you disagree with me. But for me, it just didn't do it. So anyways, next question. Biggest surprise of the year. For this, Light Force. And I did talk about this book a lot, just a couple videos again. Bethlehem Wall video. I did talk about this book a lot, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it again. But I went into this just expecting a good book. I was expecting something decent. I was not expecting me to end up here in Bethlehem as a result of reading this book, which is what happened. And so, I mean, it was much better than I thought it was going to be, but also it made an impact on my life that I just was not expecting. So there's that. Light Force is my biggest surprise of the year. Next, new favorite author. This may be a debut author or a new to you author. And new to me, Matt Rhodes wrote a book, No Shortcut to Success. This is a book, I disagree with him on some things near the end of the book, but 90% of the book, I was like, yes. He's writing from the perspective, he is a missionary, and he's writing from the mission's perspective and on how so many people are getting it wrong with some of the modern theories of missions that are really doing more harm than good. And I wish I'd read this book 6 years ago before I went on the field. But even more than that, it was just such a good book. And there's so many things here that I absolutely agree with. And I've actually talked about these same issues with some friends and close people. And so I really appreciated this book. Like I said, there's a few things at the end that I didn't agree with. Doesn't come from the exact same theological standpoint as me, but it was a great book. Next question, newest fictional crush. And for this, I actually had to go off book because I tried and I couldn't think of a fictional crush from any of the fictional books that I was reading. However, Moon Knight, the first few episodes were great. The show itself was not as good as I felt like it started out great, but it kind of bombed the second half of the series. But Layla, yeah, she's my newest crush. Layla Al-Faouli, I believe it's pronounced in the book. She is the ex-wife and kind of like the co-hero. I mean, along with Mark Spector. It's a Marvel series. But I just felt, I mean, it's not necessarily that she's the most beautiful person in the world, but she's intelligent, she's loyal, she's smart, she's a genuinely good person. She's also very talented. She's a great fighter. So, I mean, she's like the all-around package. And I'm like, yeah, she's a crush. Anyways, it is what it is. Book that made you cry. For this, I chose The Kneeling Christian by Albert Richardson. It's a book on prayer. It wasn't so much the book itself, and it's actually a classic. It was written probably more than 100 years ago. I'd have to look it up, but a while ago. It wasn't so much the book itself, but when he was talking, I felt like my grandmother was talking to me, and my grandmother had passed away. She and Krista from Books and Jams can probably agree with this. She is probably the best, the person I know with the best, most solid prayer life. And a lot of the things Albert Richardson was saying and the perspective that he had, and yes, Richardson, I'm a Richardson, we're not related. But anyways, a lot of the things he said and the perspective he had and the way he said things really almost felt like my grandmother was talking to me through this book. And so it pulled on a few heartstrings on that. So, book that made you happy. Number one, book that made you happy. Now, I'm going way out in left field for this one. This is probably a surprise for anyone that doesn't know me. But anyways, for this, one of the textbooks it wasn't a textbook, but it was a book that I used for my final exam paper for a few papers for one of my classes. It's a Philippians commentary it's the Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament. And this is a very challenging, very difficult commentary. I haven't finished yet, but even though the class is done, I've been working my way through this book simply because I am enjoying so much realizing that I can do Greek. I never thought, I've always, I'd studied Hebrew and I did that, but I never really took Greek, and I was always, I was afraid of it. But this book is very hard, very challenging. If you don't have a solid or at least a moderate level of Greek, I would not recommend this for you. And I feel like it's beyond my Greek ability, but it's written and presented in a way that I'm learning as I'm working through, and it's making me work through the Greek of the book of Philippians. And I'm so happy that I can do it and that it's worth the work, and I'm enjoying it very much. So, book that made you happy, Philippians. And the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year. Really? I don't judge books by the cover, and neither should you. Number 13, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I actually pulled out 6 books for this. 3 of them are actually advanced copies I got from NetGalley. They're more history-based. One is The Evolution of Charles Darwin, which I guess the book is going to just kind of take us through the voyage of the HMS Beagle, which was that famous voyage Darwin went on that changed the way we view our life on Earth. I don't agree necessarily with everything there. And also, evolution isn't something that came out of left field. It was really, there were already people leaning in that direction. And Darwin pretty much took a bunch of different ideas and combined them into one larger worldview. But it was really mostly all there. So I'm going to see if that comes up in the book at all. But anyways, The Evolution of Charles Darwin is the first book. The second book is The Mongol Storm. And this is pretty much a history of the Crusades, focusing on the Mongols. Because, the Crusades had already come in and they'd been going for a couple hundred years, and it was almost like a stalemate had been achieved. And sometimes the Crusaders and sometimes the Muslims, and they're fighting back and forth, and it's a fairly balanced battle. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Mongols came in from the east and wrecked both sides and upset the balance, tipped the apple cart, and ultimately changed history, especially changed history in the Middle East. And there's not many really good books on the Crusades from the Mongol standpoint like this, or the Mongol advances into the Middle East. So I have high hopes that this will be a really good book on that aspect of history. And then the third, that's really a fiction or a nonfiction history type book, is Mastering the Art of Command. This is looking at World War II. Admiral Nimitz was the admiral over the Pacific Fleet in World War II. And I understand that this book is really a leadership lessons that we can learn from from his leadership in the Pacific. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And then I have 3 other books. All 3 of these are by authors I have very recently met. These are people who actually either work in Bethlehem Bible College or are close to it. So they also all have a very Israeli, Palestinian, Middle Eastern viewpoint to these. The first is Through My Enemy's Eyes, Envisioning Reconciliation in Israel and Palestine. This is written by Salim Munayer, who is, I've met him, I actually listened to him give a presentation, which is a lot of the very similar stuff, but it's looking at the Middle East, and there's 2 authors, and one is Israeli, a Messianic Israeli, and the other is a Palestinian Christian. So 2 Christians, but from both sides of the wall, wrote this book together just as how can we bring reconciliation to this issue. Another one very similar by Munther Isaac, who is a professor here, The Other Side of the Wall, and this is a Palestinian Christian's narrative of lament and hope, and he's really just talking about his experiences as a Palestinian Christian and what's going on, and really talks about the history of Christianity among the Palestinian people. So there's that. And then the final book that I would like to read this year, and preferably this summer, is the biography of the founder of this college, Bashar Awad. I already know a lot of his story, and some of that story is told in Light Force, but this is really just his biography. And he had a father who was killed in 1946. He was not a fighter. He was not part of the war, but he was killed as a civilian casualty. That was his father during the, 1948. He was killed by an Israeli soldier. So what happened to his family, and as everything was going down between 48 and 67 and all of that, what was it like growing up in that? And so the book is called In the Dark Street Steining, a Palestinian story of hope and resilience in Bethlehem. So that is that book, most book that I'm reading by the end of the year. So I'm not tagging anybody because pretty much everybody's already done this mid-year book tag. But thanks for being here. Thanks for reading it or for watching with me. I'm BJ. Go read it again.